She gave birth alone. In a stark white room filled with the sharp scent of antiseptic, her trembling hands searched for something, someone to hold on to. But all she found were the distant faces of nurses and doctors. And him? He was 8,000 miles away, seated in a lavish boardroom, signing a $50 million deal. In that moment, she understood. To him, work would always matter more than family. She swallowed her tears, cradled the newborn against her chest, and made herself a vow. Never again would she need him. 9 months later, her heart had hardened. She chose to leave him forever. No more hope, no more waiting. But then, when fate brought them face to face, the baby turned toward him. Wide, shining eyes lit up, and, for the very first time, smiled. Time itself seemed to stop. He froze. She ached. Could a single fragile smile heal everything, or only cut the wound deeper? Would you forgive a man who only shows up when it's almost too late? Tell us in the comments what you would do. Marcus Reed had signed billion-dollar contracts without hesitation. His signature alone could shift skylines, raise towers, and bury competitors. In boardrooms across Manhattan, his hand was steady, precise, unshaken by pressure. Yet today, inside this courthouse, it betrayed him. He sat at the plaintiff's table, the divorce papers resting in a leather folder before him. His fingers pressed against the edge, but they trembled slightly, refusing the control he demanded. These pages were not figures, not clauses, not acquisitions. They were the quiet burial of 4 years, reduced to legal terms and empty lines for signatures. His attorney whispered something about process and efficiency. He nodded, though he barely heard her. All he could hear was the hollow sound of his own breathing. This was no merger to be closed, no victory to be claimed. It was a confession in ink, proof of indifference, proof of absence. Marcus straightened his suit jacket and checked his watch. 13 minutes early, as always. But time felt heavier here, each second stretching, mocking him. For the first time in his empire-building life, the man who conquered markets could not conquer the shaking in his own hands. The courthouse corridor moved with restless rhythm. Attorneys hurried past, clutching case files like armor. Families crowded the wooden benches, their whispers layered over the sharp staccato of heels striking marble floors. The air smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. Marcus noticed none of it. He sat still, shoulders squared, but his chest tightened with every beat of his heart. His focus narrowed, cutting out the noise until all that remained was the pulsing reminder of why he was here. On the wall above the clerk's desk, a clock ticked loudly, measuring the distance between his choice and its consequence. He glanced at his watch. 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes early, exactly as planned. He had built his life on punctuality, on discipline, on arriving before others so he could never be caught unprepared. But this was not preparation. This was waiting for the end of something he had once promised would last forever. Around him, life continued without pause. Strangers debated custody rights. A clerk shuffled stacks of forms. Yet, Marcus felt apart. An island in a storm he had created himself. The courthouse was full of voices. Still, he heard only the echo of his own silence. 4 years ago, love had filled their home. 2 years of warmth, of laughter, of small moments stitched together like silk. Naomi's hand in his, dinners that stretched long into the night, promises whispered when the city outside never slept. Then came the silence. 2 years of indifference, of distance measured not in miles but in minutes ignored. Missed dinners, missed calls, apologies left unsaid. The warmth cooled into habit. The laughter dissolved into quiet resentment. Now the evidence sat in his folder. 4 years, divided cleanly, 2 of joy, 2 of abandonment. The divorce papers were not just a document. They were a record of failure, a ledger of love that had been withdrawn without notice. Marcus told himself this was inevitable, that people grew apart, that ambition required sacrifice. But ambition had not warned him of this hollow weight. Ambition had not told him that success in towers and contracts could mean ruin inside his own home. The marriage was already gone. What remained was ceremony, an official burial in fluorescent light. He lowered his gaze to the papers again. 4 years together, and nothing left but ink. The heavy oak door creaked open behind him. Marcus did not turn at first. Years of negotiation had trained him to ignore distractions, to stay fixed on the task before him, but the silence that followed was different. Soft footsteps crossed the floor, familiar, controlled. They reached the threshold of the courtroom, And then he heard a voice, steady, gentle, but carrying weight enough to break through every defense he had left. Naomi. She stood framed in the doorway, holding a small bundle against her chest. Elijah. Their son, 9 months old. His hair dark, his eyes unmistakably Reed eyes. The same steel gray that had stared down boardrooms and bent competitors into submission, now blinking wide and innocent at the world. Naomi's expression held no anger. That was gone, burned away months ago. What remained was resignation, quiet strength built from doing everything alone. She shifted Elijah in her arms, steady and practiced. The courtroom, buzzing seconds before, fell still. Every gaze fixed on the fragile picture at the door. A woman, a child, and a man who had never shown up. For Marcus, the silence was a verdict. Marcus had known of the child. He had seen the hospital bills forwarded by his assistant. He had ignored the ultrasound pictures that appeared in his inbox. He had even skimmed the insurance forms, scrolling past them like junk mail. But this was the first time he faced the truth in flesh and breath. Elijah's eyes met his, steel gray. The same eyes Marcus had used to dominate negotiations, to silence rivals across mahogany tables. Now, reflected back in miniature, they stripped him bare. The child reached out, tiny fingers curling around the fabric of Naomi's sweater. Unaware of the storm his presence had created, unaware that his very existence shattered the armor of a man who thought himself unshakable. Marcus swallowed hard. His heart pounded against his ribs. This was no abstract obligation, no invoice, no digital reminder. This was blood, bone, and a gaze that carried his own reflection. For a moment, time seemed to hold still. It was not the judge, not the attorneys, not the silence of the courtroom that bound him. It was that look, the undeniable mirror that forced Marcus to see himself, and everything he had chosen to ignore. Judge Marlowe cleared his throat. His eyes moved from Naomi's calm face to the restless child in her arms, then to Marcus, pale and rigid. The courtroom, usually brisk with routine, felt heavy with something unspoken. "This case," the judge said slowly, "presents complexities that cannot be rushed." He set the file aside. "We will recess for 15 minutes. I suggest you use the time wisely." The gavel struck once, sharp against the silence. Marcus did not rise at once. His body remained seated, but his thoughts scattered. The courtroom emptied around him. Attorneys whispering, clerks gathering papers, spectators filing out. Yet he stayed motionless, staring at the folder of divorce papers as if it belonged to someone else. 15 minutes. It was nothing in the span of empire building. Deals took months, sometimes years. But 15 minutes now felt like a lifetime compressed, a test he had no strategy for. For the first time in his life, Marcus Reed, the man who commanded entire skylines, felt powerless. Not because of money, not because of reputation, but because love and loss sat only a few steps away, and he had no script to follow. The marble corridor stretched long and sterile. Marcus followed Naomi's figure, her steps steady, her grip on Elijah firm. The buzz of other families drifted around them, but her voice cut sharper than any noise. "I gave birth alone," she said, not looking at him. 36 hours of pain, fear, and you? You were in Los Angeles, signing a contract." Her words struck with precision. No shouting, just truth, delivered plainly. "I chose life," Naomi continued, adjusting Elijah against her shoulder. "You chose money." Marcus opened his mouth, but no answer came quickly. He had faced senators, investors, hostile boards. He had always had the perfect line. Here, nothing sounded right. Naomi stopped near a bench. She looked at him at last, her eyes steady, not cruel, only final. "Do you understand what that means? When I needed you most, you were absent. Not for a day, for months." Elijah fussed softly, and she rocked him with practiced ease. The child calmed in her arms. Marcus's throat tightened. He had no deal to offer, no figure to present, only the heavy knowledge that every word she spoke was true. Naomi's voice grew quieter, but each word cut deeper. "I sent you messages when I heard his heartbeat for the first time. You never replied. I called when the doctor warned of complications. Your assistant answered. I texted when he kicked inside me. You marked it as read." Her gaze did not waver. "I labored for hours, Marcus. Alone. I prayed you would walk through the hospital door. Even then, even after all your excuses, I believed you might show up. But you didn't. Not once." Every detail landed like a blow. Ultrasound pictures ignored, voicemails left unheard, photos of her swollen belly sent into silence. Marcus felt each memory like a knife turned slowly. He remembered. He remembered every notification. He had seen them, yes, but he had filed them away as if they were nothing urgent. Naomi shifted Elijah again, her arms strong but weary. "Do you know what it feels like," she whispered, "to bring life into the world while the one who promised to love you is thousands of miles away, chasing another signature?" Marcus lowered his eyes. For the first time, shame burned hotter than pride. At last, Marcus spoke, his voice rough, too low at first. "I was building something," he said. "For us, for him, a future no one could take away." Naomi laughed. Not cruel, but broken. The sound echoed in the sterile hall, colder than anger. "For us?" she repeated. "No, Marcus. For you. Your towers, your deals, your endless race for more. None of that kept me warm at night. None of that held my hand through the fear. And tell me, did Elijah have a father while you built your empire?" Her eyes shone, not with tears but with the steady fire of someone who had survived without him. Marcus wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain flights, deadlines, shareholders, but the words turned to ash in his mouth. He saw Elijah's face, pressed against Naomi's sweater, secure in her arms, and not in his. Naomi's voice softened, but the edge remained. "You don't need to tell me about futures, Marcus. I live in the present. And in the present, our son only knows one parent." The truth left him silent. Elijah shifted in Naomi's arms, his small head pressing against her chest. He made soft, babbling sounds, half-formed syllables that carried no meaning and yet filled the hallway with life. One tiny hand stretched outward, patting against Naomi's sweater, gripping the fabric with instinctive need. That hand was small, fragile, yet it anchored her completely. Marcus stood a few feet away. The distance was nothing in space, but everything in truth. Between them stretched years of absence, months of silence, choices that had favored contracts over cradle. The divide felt like a chasm, and he was stranded on the wrong side. He watched as Elijah turned his face upward, eyes bright and unclouded, searching for nothing more than warmth and safety, and he realized that this child had already chosen his center of gravity. Naomi was the axis. Marcus was a shadow. His throat tightened. He could not deny Elijah. He could not argue with resemblance. Every feature was a reminder. The sharp chin, the gray eyes, the stubborn set of his mouth. Proof written not in ink, but in blood. The child existed. The child belonged. And Marcus had been a stranger to his own son. Elijah stirred again, restless in the quiet hall. His eyes flicked from Naomi's face to Marcus's, as if measuring the distance. Then, without warning, his lips curled. A smile. Small. Brief, but real. Marcus froze. That smile, innocent and undeserved, struck harder than any boardroom defeat. For 9 months he had been absent, faceless, a name only on bills. Yet here, this child looked at him and found no enemy. Only possibility. His chest constricted. He felt something unfamiliar, raw, and almost unbearable. He had seen victory smiles across tables, had accepted handshakes worth fortunes, but never this. Never a gift so unearned. Naomi glanced at him. She said nothing, but the flicker in her eyes revealed the cruelty of grace. The baby smiled at the man who had not been there, the man who had missed every first, and yet the child's innocence offered what Marcus himself could not give: forgiveness without words. For the first time the fortress of Marcus Reed cracked, and in that single smile he saw both judgment and redemption. It was fragile, it was fleeting, but it shattered him all the same. Back inside the courtroom, silence settled like dust. Judge Marlowe lifted his file again, ready to continue. Naomi adjusted Elijah on her lap, prepared for the inevitable. Marcus sat, rigid, the papers before him waiting for his signature. Then his voice broke the stillness. "Your Honor," he said, standing. His tone was rough, uncertain. I need time. 30 days. To learn what it means to be a father. To prove I am not only a man of contracts, but of commitments." The words startled even himself. The judge raised a brow. Attorneys shifted in surprise. The courtroom seemed to pause, caught off guard by a billionaire begging for something that money could not buy. Marcus's eyes moved to Elijah, who stared back with curious calm. The child cooed softly, as if answering. "I ask," Marcus continued, For 30 days before this marriage is buried forever. 30 days to stand, not as a businessman, but as a father. The gavel did not fall. Instead, the weight of the room hung in the air. A plea had been made, and everyone knew it was no ordinary request. Naomi's gaze did not soften. She looked at Marcus, then at the judge, then down at Elijah, whose hand now tugged at her sweater. 30 days, she said slowly. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like a blade. But understand me, Marcus. This is not a game. This is not a performance to win sympathy. If you fail, every door closes, permanently. Her warning fell heavy, not with anger, but with finality. Marcus nodded once. His throat was dry, but he forced himself to meet her eyes. He saw no forgiveness there, no spark of the woman he had first loved, only guarded resolve, earned through nights alone and days of carrying more than her share. The judge leaned back, hands folded. "The court will allow it. 30 days, he confirmed. Naomi turned her attention back to Elijah, pressing her cheek gently to his head. The child squirmed, then settled. Marcus remained standing. The words echoed in his mind. 30 days. Not enough to erase 9 months. Not enough to erase years. But it was all he had been given, and he knew it was the last chance he would ever get. The session ended. Papers shuffled. Voices murmured. Marcus left the courtroom in a daze. Outside, his Tesla waited. The leather interior welcomed him with familiar luxury, yet it felt sterile, foreign. He sat behind the wheel, motionless. His phone vibrated against the console. A storm of notifications, missed calls from executives, emails about overseas markets, texts demanding urgent attention, the pulse of the empire he had built. He stared at the screen. His hand hovered. Then, with a quiet breath, he pressed the button and shut it all down. The silence that followed was almost violent. No buzzing, no ringing, no reminders of what the world wanted from him. For the first time in years, there was nothing but his own thoughts. He leaned back, eyes closed. Images flooded him. Naomi's steady stare, Elijah's smile, the judge's words. 30 days. The empire could wait. The skyscrapers would stand without him. But the fragile thread holding him to his family was fraying fast. And in that silence, Marcus Reed understood. Power had never made him weaker than this moment of choice. The drive back through Manhattan felt endless. Skyscrapers rose like monuments to everything he had conquered. Yet, Marcus saw only empty glass and steel. He thought of the penthouse perched above Central Park, the marble floors polished by strangers, the paintings chosen by consultants, the wine cellar stocked with bottles he never opened. He remembered the parties, flashing cameras, laughter that never reached the eyes, handshakes sealed with champagne, deals signed that broke records, numbers that made headlines. He had stood at the center of it all, untouchable. But now the memories rang hollow. The applause had faded. The fortune, the recognition, the power, none of it had been present when Naomi was alone in the delivery room. None of it had held Elijah through nights of fever. The empire had crowned him king, but the throne was empty. The wealth, the fame, the relentless drive, it had bought him silence where love should have been. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter, realizing that success without witnesses, without family, without meaning, was not success at all. It was a gilded cage, and for the first time, he wanted out. 3 days later, Marcus stood outside a baby store on Madison Avenue. His suit was pressed, his shoes polished, yet his hands trembled. At exactly 7, the doors opened. A woman with silver curls greeted him kindly. "Can I help you?" Marcus hesitated. The words tasted strange on his tongue. "I need everything. For a 9-month-old. I don't know where to start." Her eyes softened. She led him through aisles of diapers, bottles, formula, car seats, and tiny clothes. She explained sizes, feeding schedules, routines. She showed him how to hold a bottle, how to test water on his wrist, how to recognize hunger cues. He listened intently, scribbling notes like a student cramming for an exam. The billionaire who once dictated billion-dollar contracts now stood humbled by pacifiers and teething rings. By the time he left, his car overflowed with supplies. But it wasn't the purchases that mattered. It was the act of beginning. Marcus realized fatherhood could not be bought in bulk. It had to be lived, messy, uncertain, and one careful step at a time. And for the first time, he allowed himself to try. The pediatric clinic smelled of disinfectant and Cheerios. Pastel walls lined with painted animals tried to calm restless children. Marcus arrived early, leather notebook in hand, filled with questions he had researched late into the night. When Naomi entered with Elijah, the air shifted. He stood, awkward but eager, as though approaching an unfamiliar stage. Dr. Holloway examined Elijah with practiced hands. She weighed him, measured him, checked his reflexes. Elijah squirmed, then cried out when the needle pierced his skin. The sound tore through Marcus. He had faced hostile boardrooms, international scandals, crises worth millions. None had struck like this, a child's cry, sharp and small. Naomi soothed Elijah instantly, her touch calming, her voice steady. Marcus felt useless beside her, a spectator to a bond already formed. Dr. Holloway turned to him. "Your son doesn't need luxury, Mr. Reed. He needs you, not once in a while, every day." Marcus nodded. The words landed harder than any lecture. For once, the mentor he needed was not a CEO, not a strategist, but a doctor reminding him of the simplest truth. Presence mattered more than power. Saturday morning, Marcus stood at Naomi's door. She opened it slowly, surprise flickering across her face. Elijah clung to her leg, then noticed Marcus. "Duh! Duh!" the child babbled, reaching forward. Marcus froze. The word struck deeper than any accolade. His throat tightened as he bent down, letting Elijah grasp his fingers with surprising strength. Naomi handed him a diaper bag. "Everything is labeled," she said. "He usually naps at noon. If he cries, hold him. Don't panic." Marcus nodded, carrying Elijah into his penthouse for the first time. The skyscraper suddenly felt too large, too silent. He tried to follow instructions. He warmed a bottle, too hot at first, then cooled it awkwardly. He played with blocks, clumsy but persistent, catching them as Elijah threw them with glee. He hummed nonsense songs when Elijah grew fussy, rocking until the small head rested against his chest. Every step was foreign, every action imperfect. Yet Elijah laughed, babbled, and finally drifted into sleep. Marcus stared down at his son, realizing fatherhood was not about skill, but about staying. And he was staying. The penthouse was quiet. Lights dim, city hum muffled by thick glass. Elijah slept against Marcus's chest, small breaths rising and falling. Marcus sat in the rocking chair he had assembled himself, staring at the miracle of weight in his arms. He leaned down, voice breaking into a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. The words cracked. "I wasn't there when you came into this world. I wasn't there for your mother when she needed me most. But I am here now. I will not leave again." He pressed a kiss against Elijah's dark hair. His eyes burned, but he let the tears fall freely, unhidden, unashamed. Unbeknownst to him, Naomi stood at the doorway. She had come quietly, checking in after hours away. She stopped, frozen, as she heard his words. Her eyes blurred. She saw not the cold magnate who once chose contracts over family, but a man undone by the innocence of a child. She said nothing. She only watched as Marcus held Elijah tighter, whispering promises that were not for her, not for anyone else, only for the boy who had saved him. The clock struck midnight when Marcus's phone shattered the silence. He slipped out from the rocking chair, careful not to wake Elijah. On the other end, his assistant's voice trembled. "Mr. Reed, the Los Angeles contract, $200 million on the line. It's collapsing. The board insists you fly out tonight." Marcus's chest tightened. For years, these were the calls he lived for. The adrenaline of crisis, the power to swoop in and save everything. But tonight, something was different. He glanced at the crib where Elijah now slept soundly, one small hand curled against his cheek. The boy's breathing was steady, unaware that his father's empire might be crumbling. The voice pressed again, urgent. "Sir, the Koreans won't proceed without you. If we lose this, our credibility is gone." Marcus's hand hovered above his suitcase. The private jet was ready. The board was waiting. His entire identity was bound up in deals like this, but his son was in the next room. For the first time, Marcus felt the weight of two worlds colliding. One he had built with money, and one that had been given to him in the form of a child. Naomi answered her phone groggily, her voice edged with resignation. "Another crisis?" Marcus hesitated. "The Los Angeles deal. $200 million. They want me on a plane now." Her silence was sharp, then came the words like a knife. "There's always a deal, Marcus. Always something more important than us. But this time, you choose, money or your son." The ultimatum cut deeper than the board's threats. It wasn't about contracts or shareholders. It was about being a father. He looked again at Elijah, sleeping without worry, as though the world were safe, and he realized that every time he had chosen work, he had told Naomi and Elijah the opposite, that they were not enough. Naomi's voice softened, but only slightly. You can't have both tonight. You either fly to save a contract, or you stay to prove you're more than a businessman. The line was quiet. His heart pounded. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations, hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, yet no decision had ever felt as heavy as this. This was not a boardroom choice. It was a choice about who he was. Marcus inhaled slowly, the weight of Naomi's words pressing against him. He turned toward the crib again. Elijah shifted in his sleep, lips parting into a faint sigh, the innocence of trust embodied in that tiny frame. He raised the phone to his ear. "Listen carefully," Marcus said, his voice steady now. "We may lose this contract, but contracts come back. Deals can be rebuilt. If I lose my son, I can never replace that." The assistant stammered. "But, sir, $200 million?" "I said no," Marcus cut in, firmer. "Find another way. I'm not leaving." He hung up. His hands shook, but not from fear, from release. Marcus sat back down, letting the silence return. For the first time he had chosen love over profit, presence over prestige. In the dark, he whispered to his son again, "You are worth more than everything I've ever built." The deal might collapse. His board might revolt. His reputation might shatter, but tonight, Marcus knew he had made the only decision that mattered. The next morning, the boardroom buzzed with anger. 12 executives sat around the mahogany table, their voices sharp with accusation. "You abandoned us in crisis," one shouted. $200 million evaporated overnight." Marcus stood at the head, shoulders square. For years, he would have apologized, promised to fix everything. Today, he did not flinch. "I made a choice," he said calmly, "and I'll tell you why. A company cannot be strong if its leader is broken at home. Stability in business starts with stability in family." The room fell silent. Another director sneered. "Are you suggesting family is more important than shareholders?" "Yes," Marcus said, without hesitation. "Because when leaders sacrifice everything personal for profit, they burn out. And when they burn out, companies collapse. What we need is not endless sacrifice, but sustainability." Some faces hardened. Others softened, considering. Marcus pressed on. "I will not abandon my son for a contract. If that makes me unfit to lead in your eyes, so be it. But know this, a man who stands for nothing but money will eventually lose even that." The fallout was swift. The Los Angeles deal collapsed. Headlines screamed of a billion-dollar empire in jeopardy. Investors whispered about replacements. Marcus braced for ruin. Yet, something strange happened. The very decision that seemed reckless sparked a different conversation. A journalist ran the headline, "The CEO who chose family over fortune." The story spread across networks, carried by mothers, fathers, workers tired of relentless sacrifice. Social media exploded with support. Parents called him brave. Families thanked him for saying aloud what so many felt, that no deal was worth missing the lives of those you love. By week's end, the company's stock, expected to plummet, began to climb. Analysts called it the humanity premium. Investors believed in a leader who could see beyond numbers. Marcus read the headlines in quiet disbelief. He had lost a contract, yes, but somehow, by choosing his child, he had gained something more. For the first time in his career, success was measured not in dollars, but in respect, in trust, and in love. Central Park hummed with life on a spring afternoon. Children laughed on the playground, dogs tugged at leashes, joggers moved down the paths. Marcus stood behind a swing set, pushing Elijah higher and higher. The boy was now 2, his small legs kicking the air, his voice echoing across the park. "Daddy! Higher, Daddy!" Marcus laughed, steady hands guiding the swing. The sound of that single word, Daddy, was worth more than every deal he had ever signed. On a nearby bench, Naomi sat with a book in her lap, though her eyes rarely left them. Her smile was quiet, content, the kind that carried both memory and forgiveness. The man who once ruled boardrooms now found his throne in the simple rhythm of a swing. Each push was a promise. Each laugh from Elijah was a crown. 2 years ago, Marcus Reed was the billionaire who nearly lost everything. Now he was simply a father, and that title was enough. Evenings looked different now. Marcus no longer sat beneath glass ceilings staring at spreadsheets past midnight. He no longer lived on flights and conference calls. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the floor of a modest living room, holding a book with worn pages. Elijah climbed into his lap, eyes wide, waiting for the story to begin. "Once upon a time," Marcus read, his voice soft, his son leaning closer with each word. Naomi passed by the doorway, pausing to watch them. The sight carried more weight than any title Marcus had held. He was no longer CEO in full command. He had stepped back, shared power, learned trust. Some called it weakness. For Marcus, it was freedom. When he closed the book and kissed Elijah's forehead, he realized this was his greatest trade. He had exchanged contracts for bedtime stories, skyscrapers for laughter, billions for belonging. And for once, it was a deal where he had gained far more than he gave away. One evening, after Elijah had fallen asleep, Marcus and Naomi sat together in the quiet kitchen. The city outside still glittered, but inside there was only soft lamplight and unspoken history. Marcus broke the silence. "For years, I believed success was measured in towers, in contracts, in numbers printed on glossy reports." Naomi's eyes searched his face, waiting. "But I was wrong," he continued, voice low. "I know that now. Success is not what you build in stone or steel. Success is when your son looks at you and calls you daddy." The words hung between them, simple and raw. Naomi blinked back tears. She had heard promises before, too many broken, but this felt different. Not grand, not rehearsed, just truth spoken in its plainest form. For the first time she let her hand rest gently on his. Not forgiveness yet, but a step toward something they could build again. Summer sunlight melted into evening. The three of them sat together on a bench near the ice cream truck. Elijah held a cone with sprinkles, chocolate smearing his cheeks. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. For years, that sound had ruled his life, demanding obedience. He reached for it, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he powered it off. Naomi noticed. Her smile deepened. Elijah giggled, offering his sticky cone for them both to share. For the first time in decades, Marcus felt truly free. Not free because of wealth or authority, but free because he was no longer chained to it. Free to taste ice cream with his son. Free to sit in silence with Naomi. Free to exist without always chasing the next deal. The world was still loud, still urgent. But in that moment, all he heard was laughter. All he saw was love. Marcus Reed once had everything. Wealth, fame, power. Yet he almost lost the one treasure that truly mattered. The right to live in love and to be loved in return. But he changed. He chose family over fortune, presence over profit. And in that choice, he discovered what no empire could ever buy: belonging, forgiveness, and a love that endures. If you were Naomi, would you forgive him? Would you open your heart again to a man who once chose money over you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that may move your heart, stir your soul, and remind you of what truly matters. Marcus was once a billionaire in numbers. Now, in love, he is rich beyond measure.